How to Win Friends and Influence People. If you haven't read or at least heard of this 1936 self help book written by Dale Carnegie, you must be living under a rock. It sold well over 30 million copies and is one of the best selling books of all time. So, on the season 18 curtain raiser, I have a very special guest. She's the chairperson and managing director of Dale Carnegie Training India, Pallavi Jha. A very warm welcome to the show, Pallavi.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Kaushik. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thanks so much. So, you've been the chairperson and managing director of the Dale Carnegie Training India for about 21 odd years, right? You've led their India operations, have won several global awards as well for your service and sales excellence. So, let's start right from there. How has the outlook on leadership, according to you, changed over the 2 decades globally and also in India?
20 years ago, we were a completely different country. We were just beginning to see the early days of liberalization. So we were still very insular. Corporate cultures were still Indian family dominated enterprises. So leadership really meant being the owner manager in many cases. In 2003, when we started, there was an early advent of foreign companies coming in. But by and large, leadership has undergone a huge change. One is, let's understand, globalization has happened, which meant that the way we operated has got to be cross culturally, cross market relevant now. Tech has changed massively in the last 21 years. So that has had its own impact, both in terms of how leaders navigate technology within the organizations and how it helps them. Workforce dynamics. I mean, we were a young country then, we continue to be a young country, but overall, when you start working with multinationals and Indian companies are now become global conglomerates, you're working with different age demographics. So, in many markets, there are four generations working together. Even in India today, three generations work together, sometimes four generations, even in India. And that has its own challenge of diversity. There's a huge shift in so many ways. As a country, we've moved from being an extremely, I would say, humble country to being somebody who's very assertive on the global stage. It's come because of 20 years of experience, and I think our leaders and what's demanded of leadership has hugely changed.
Very nicely put. Of course, you're an endorsed leadership trainer and an executive coach as well. So there has been a question that has been on the top of my mind for right from the beginning when I've started this entire podcast, and probably have an inkling of what the answer would be. But still, are leaders born or grown?
Very good question. I think a little bit of both, because if you are already self aware and if you are already confident, self confident, I think in a way you have a head start for leadership. And to that extent, I would say you're born. Born in the sense that it may not be nature, but it may be your nurture, early childhood nurture that makes you that. That's why that debate, right? I mean, do you have a natural flair for leadership or not? And then the other part is, it's not difficult to learn to be a leader, right? Because there are ways and means to influence others. There's no one formula to be a leader. There are many ways to be a leader. And leadership is sometimes situational, sometimes in crisis, sometimes personal level, sometimes project level, sometimes organizational level. It depends on how you define leadership. So I think we are all leaders at some level or another. We just have to manifest our leadership in the situation that we need to apply it in.
In your vast experience of training, I'm sure many leaders across industries, what are the biggest myths in the mind of the leaders that you have seen which need course correcting?
To begin with, let me tell you that as an executive coach, I do believe that everybody has the resources within themselves to be a leader. We just have to have very reflective conversations and a deep amount of self reflection, some amount of practice, some amount of what we call as pretending to be a leader, to fill in those shoes, and we get there. So that is what I feel about leadership. And coming back to your next question about
Mhm.
myths, I think the first myth is that leaders are greater than managers, and that leaders don't have to manage. I don't think leadership is about just having high, lofty visions and only being focused only on strategy and not anything else, because I think leaders cannot live with vision alone. They have to see a pathway and a direction in which that vision can be achieved. And that becomes the guidance to their managers, who then take that vision and then further find ways to execute it. So I think, and as we say in Dale Carnegie, leadership is about intermingling both people and process side of businesses. It doesn't mean you will do everything. You have to learn the art of delegation and empowering. So I think that is the first myth I do want to bust, that it's not just about 20,000 feet thinking. It's about also sometimes rolling up your sleeves and doing things. The second myth, I think, is that leaders have all the answers. And I think the best leaders are humble and vulnerable enough to know that they don't have all the answers, and therefore work in more collaborative ways with others to arrive at common conclusions. And it would be wrong for somebody who reports into a leader to believe that they would have the guidance that is required for them. Sometimes it's about just working together. What else? That it's synonymous with authority. You don't have to hold a title, you don't have to hold a position to be a leader. In fact, real leadership is about influencing people. So when you're influencing somebody, is you're trying to get somebody around to maybe your way of thinking, or giving them a perspective that they can think about that's yours, right? This can happen as a salesperson, this can happen as a customer service agent, and this can also happen as a organizational CEO who's setting a new direction. So it doesn't have to be a person who has a bunch of people reporting to him, has a title, is a functional head or organizational head. And I think that's really the other myth.
I wanted to just touch on one aspect that you mentioned here, right? You mentioned about actually rolling up your sleeves and getting your hands dirty. I have seen a number of leaders who are on the other side of the fence. So they will want to do everything themselves, and that's why they will not delegate. So, how do you draw the balance there?
So, one of the key aspects of leadership is empowering. You might be somebody who's capable of, high level thinking and also capable of working in the tracks. But is that really leadership? You will take your great vision and bring it down to the capacity of yourself instead of multiplying your vision and scaling it up. So, I think good leaders look at how to actually work with other people, and delegation, holding people accountable, coaching, and empowering are critical leadership skills, I would think. So, unless you're doing that, you are a manager leader and not just a leader.
If we have to delve deeper into the traits of a leader, like you mentioned around the coaching aspect of it, obviously it's a continuous process, but how do you really decide that it is worth actually training this person also or not?
Obviously, you look for people who have a high potential for a particular position. Again, leadership is too broad a term. When we look at in terms of HR or organizational perspective, you typically look at high potential individuals. What do these individuals have high potential for? For the next level of growth within that organization. So it may be a particular position, a role for a particular organizational goal in a particular organization structure. So typically that's how companies would assess that are they ready for the next level of, and that's how leadership development happens. There are entrepreneurs who realize that they're built something, we are startup people, but we are struggling to scale up, or maybe we need to diversify a little more and I need some more support somewhere. So there are different types of leadership development. It could be executive coaching, it could be mentoring, it could be just pure skills training. What would we really look for in a good leadership candidate is, I think, a very clear vision, right? I mean, unless you have clarity of vision, I don't think you can progress, because if you're muddled, you're not providing direction to anybody. So that's, I would say, the first clear thinking, clarity of thinking. And with that comes skills like creative thinking, to be able to find the signal within the noise kind of ability. The second, of course, is, I think, very critical, emotional intelligence, empathy, and ability to, which includes, by the way, resilience and agility, self-awareness. These are all areas that are important for collaborating with other people. No leader is an island unto himself, even if they are the most introvert leaders. By the way, the biggest myth of leadership is that they are extroverts and that they are these charismatic, great speech makers. But the reality is, you have some very quiet workers who are just got their heads down to their desk and they're working away, and they're heading for maybe the top Fortune 500 companies and doing a fine job. So that's the other side, is that they need to be inspirational, but sometimes they have their own ways to influence. So there is no one formula on leadership. That's what we need to really accept. And the third would be integrity. I would put integrity, authenticity as one very, very important part, because building trust and credibility in yourself, in your vision, in your organization, to be consistent, to do as you speak, is a very important aspect. So I think trust, credibility, which is really ethics, integrity, authenticity, all of that is another very, very important trait of a
True.
leader.
Excellent. That's beautifully summarized. So now moving a bit away from leadership and into probably the hottest industry today, which some of my earlier guests have actually called it the next revolution that's facing humankind. What do you see is the effect of artificial intelligence on leaders?
Well, massive right now, obviously. It's the shiniest new object around the world. And I think fear of missing out is the biggest fear that all CEOs have at the moment. So, whether you know where it's going, whether it's ready enough, whether it's good for your business, where it is good for your business, nobody knows. But nobody wants to miss the bus, so everybody's going to jump in. So there's a little bit of a leap of faith, rather than a real informed decision that's happening at the moment. So there's a little bit of risk taking, but then everybody in the world is taking it, so it's a collective risk. I think what leaders are today assessing is, what does it mean for our enterprise? What are the risks for our enterprise with AI? In terms of the applications, everybody knows that routine work is going to get done by AI, but what does it mean for our workforce? What does it mean for our organization structure? What does it mean for the future of our how we will be doing business, how we will engage with our customers? There's a whole lot of questions that are going on, and it's still in the space of discovery. Along with that, the risk of copyrights, IP, data security. So I think security is the second big risk that they're thinking of. The third big risk, of course, is understanding the limitations, the biases within. And does that, while on the one hand we believe that data driven decision making will be good, do we know fully well the biases that are inherent in our large language models? And when we are fine tuning it, is it going to be a bigger catastrophe? We don't know yet. So there are a lot of what shall I say, fuzzy situations right now, and leaders have to just kind of figure it out. It's not a comfortable position to be in for anyone, but hopefully, this is going to be one of those transitions that we have to just figure out as we go along.
There was actually another survey also I had seen. It was around the different tiers of an organization. So the leaders actually are implementing or using AI much more frequently than the, let's say, the middle level or the lower level. And personally, I think it's a great thing, right? I myself am a huge proponent of AI. I use about five, six softwares at least every week. And the biggest fear of AI that everybody has is primarily around losing jobs. IBM has
Yes.
publicly announced, I think last year, that they have paused hiring by replacing about 30% of non customer facing roles because of AI. I think there were around 2.5 lakh layoffs that happened last year in the tech industry, and it's about 30,000 in just the first 2 months of this year. And you can name all the big names are
Yeah,
there in that. So if you are an employee,
absolutely.
how do you really counter this and what do you do about it?
So I think there is real fear is whether my job will be
Mhm.
affected, right? We don't know. And there is the fear of the unknown, because let's face it, there are many, many employees who are still wrapping their head around internet, let alone AI, right? And so to that extent, there's this whole unknown that has been thrust upon us, and we are not comfortable with it. And all we know is it might affect jobs, and it's already begun to do so. And I think that's the other responsibility that a leader has, is how can you make change when you're working on that change? How are you going to make that change more psychologically safe? How are you going to help address fears and constantly communicate on what are your plans? I think that's one big responsibility leaders need to have in the space of how we are changing our organizations with AI. But yes, employees, that famous quote from, I think, McKinsey or wherever, was humans are not going to be replaced by AI, but humans are going to be replaced by other humans who know AI,
Nice.
right? So that is really what it is. So the only way to overcome fear, as Dale Carnegie says, the only way to overcome fear is to do what you fear, right? So get curious about AI, get your hands dirty, understand it, remove the myths around AI that are in your head, right? By simply educating yourself about it. So read a lot, try your fingers on ChatGPT. You've nothing to lose, right? So the more you try, the more comfortable you get, and then you realize that, oh, it's no big deal. Obviously, you may not be prepared for complexity, but if you are reskilling yourself to know how this will work. So, in the good old days when robots were coming into manufacturing, they are also AI, right? The plant worker was going to be replaced by an AI, but the plant worker had to shift their skills from operating the machine to programming the robot, right? So it's about reskilling. And if you are able to understand, and if the organization has been fair to you, you would get a sense of where this is going and start preparing. Somewhere your organization may help you reskill, but don't wait for that to happen. Take command, as we say in Dale Carnegie, take command and help yourself. Reskilling is very much your responsibility, and this is going to be a lifelong thing. You have to be a lifelong learner. Today is AI, tomorrow is going to be something else. So change is happening, change is inevitable, and change is constant, and reskilling is the only way to stay relevant and valuable to an organization.
Very
Yeah.
true. But let's move to the other side of the table. So if you're an HR leader, what should you then be doing about it?
I think HR is overwhelmed right now. Let's face it, HR are not tech people by nature, right? But tech has taken over HR, and for good reason. So they necessarily have to use their expertise and work with IT and the technical side of the business. There are too many tech stacks in HR at the moment. There'll be a tech stack for talent acquisition, there'll be a tech stack for learning, there'll be a tech stack for just employee management. Now there will be some more AI added to everything. So, they're overwhelmed, right? So that's one part of it. But the reality is with AI, and it's not new anymore. It's rampantly used in talent acquisition. It's rampantly used today in customer service, right? All your chatbots and everything. It's rampantly used today in sales enablement, including researching your customers or helping you write scripts on how to approach them, or give real time performance data to the sales manager who can do in the moment coaching. So these are the things where HR can actually bring in. Again, it's about saying, let's declutter, let's zoom out, let's look at the whole picture, let's bring some sanity in our tech stacks, let's see where AI can make a difference. And then, of course, finally, when the entire organization is making a shift, there's a whole organization wide change management
Mm.
that has to be facilitated by HR.
Thanks for having taken the time out and wishing you the very best for your future endeavors.